The tunnel system. The city above bustled with life, but beneath its streets lay a forgotten world, a labyrinth of tunnels stretching miles deep into the earth, a Cold War relic now lost to time. No one went down there. No one dared, except for Matt and Ryan, two thrill-seeking urban explorers with a thirst for danger. This wasn't their first time sneaking into abandoned places, but something about this expedition felt different, more sinister. They had heard the rumors, of course, stories of strange symbols, inexplicable echoes, and people disappearing without a trace, but they shrugged it off. It was all part of the thrill, right? That was their first mistake. The descent into darkness. This is it, Ryan whispered, shining his flashlight on the rusted hatch that led down into the tunnel system. You ready? Matt nodded, though he couldn't shake the knot forming in his stomach. The air was thick and still, heavy with the scent of mildew. He peered down into the yawning darkness, where the first rungs of the ladder disappeared into shadow. There was an eerie silence, as if the city had been swallowed up, leaving only them in a void. Without another word, Ryan began the descent, his flashlight casting long, distorted shadows against the walls. Matt followed closely behind, the cool metal of the ladder slick with condensation. Each step down felt like a journey deeper into another world, one where the rules of reality might not apply. When they finally reached the bottom, they stood at the entrance of the tunnel, a massive concrete corridor stretching out into the unknown. Their footsteps echoed loudly as they walked, the tunnel swallowing up the light from their flashlights, leaving only a narrow path of visibility ahead. Imagine what this place must have been like back in the Cold War, Matt said, trying to break the tension. Hundreds of people crammed down here, waiting for the bombs to drop. Ryan smirked. Yeah, but now it's just us. Who knows how far this thing goes? As they ventured deeper, the air grew damp and cold, the walls lined with condensation. The deeper they went, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. The tunnel's walls were no longer smooth concrete, but covered in strange, archaic symbols that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. What do you think these are? Ryan asked, running his hand over the strange carvings. They were like nothing either of them had ever seen before, shapes and markings that didn't belong in any known language. The symbols were etched deep, as though someone or something had painstakingly carved them into the stone. I don't know, man, Matt replied, unease creeping into his voice. But I don't like it. The first signs of danger, the farther they ventured, the more the symbols seemed to cover the walls, multiplying and becoming more intricate. But it wasn't just the symbols that unnerved them. There was something else, something far more unsettling. The sound at first, it was faint, barely more than a whisper carried on the stale air. It came from deep within the tunnel, a distant echo that barely reached their ears. But as they walked, the sound became clearer, a low, guttural noise like a scream muffled by the weight of the earth above them. Did you hear that? Ryan stopped, his flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. Matt's mouth went dry. He nodded, his eyes scanning the darkness ahead. Yeah, maybe it's just the tunnel settling. They pressed on, but the sound kept growing, the echoes bouncing off the walls in strange, unpredictable patterns. It was as if the tunnel itself was amplifying the noise, twisting it into something far more malevolent. Every few steps they would stop, certain they heard footsteps behind them, faint, shuffling, as though something or someone was following them just out of sight. Let's turn back, Matt finally said, his voice tinged with panic. We've gone far enough. But Ryan, ever the risk-taker, shook his head. We haven't even found the main chamber yet. Don't be a coward, Matt. Reluctantly, Matt followed. As they walked, their flashlights began to flicker, the batteries failing despite being fresh just hours ago. Panic surged through him as the oppressive darkness pressed in closer. That's when the symbols on the walls began to change. They no longer seemed like static carvings, but as though they were moving, pulsing with a life of their own, shifting under the dim light of their flickering flashlights. Matt's breath quickened as he realized the walls themselves seemed to be closing in on them. The first encounter without warning, Matt felt something cold brush against the back of his neck. He spun around, his heart leaping into his throat, but there was nothing, just the endless blackness of the tunnel behind him. Ryan, something's down here with us, he whispered, his voice trembling. Ryan was about to respond when the scream came again, louder this time, but it wasn't an echo. It was real, close, too close. The scream was followed by a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the walls, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe, as though the tunnel itself was alive, its very structure warping and shifting around them. The Chaserians' bravado finally cracked. "We need to go." Now they turned and sprinted back the way they had come, but the tunnel had changed. The once straight path now seemed to twist and turn, leading them in circles. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly now, their light barely illuminating the path ahead. The flickering of their flashlights grew worse, casting fleeting glimpses of the tunnel ahead. With each flicker, they saw things, shadows moving just beyond the edge of the light, figures tall and gaunt, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark, their movements unnatural and erratic. Matt's heart pounded in his chest, every instinct screaming at him to run faster. But no matter how fast they ran, the shadows seemed to grow closer, their whispers filling the air with words he couldn't understand. Suddenly, Ryan tripped, crashing to the ground with a heavy thud. I can't get up," he shouted, panic flooding his voice. His legs seemed pinned to the ground, as if something invisible had latched onto them. Matt rushed to his side, grabbing him by the arm and pulling with all his might. But something was pulling back, something powerful and unseen. "Let go," Matt screamed, his voice echoing down the tunnel. Ryan's eyes widened in terror as he glanced over Matt's shoulder. "Behind you." Matt whipped around, his heart stopping in his chest. Standing just a few feet away was one of the shadowy figures, its form barely visible in the dim light. Its face was featureless save for its eyes glowing with a faint, malevolent light. It reached out toward them with long, bony fingers, the air around it growing colder. Matt pulled harder, yanking Ryan free of whatever had been holding him. They stumbled to their feet, adrenaline driving him forward as they raced down the twisting, unending tunnel. The revelation just when Matt thought they were lost forever. They stumbled into a large chamber, a cavernous room with high, vaulted ceilings. In the center stood an ancient altar, covered in more of the strange symbols, and surrounding it were bones, hundreds of them, piled high around the altar like a grotesque offering. "What is this place?" Ryan whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his heart. Matt's eyes were drawn to the altar where something gleamed in the faint light. A book, old and worn, its pages filled with the same gleam to the faint light. A book, old and worn, its pages filled with the sign to Sal. But as soon as he touched the book, the ground shook violently, and a deafening roar filled the chamber. The shadows that had been following them surged into the room, their forms now clearer, tall, monstrous figures, their eyes burning with hatred. "They don't want us to leave," Ryan yelled. The final escape, the walls of the chamber began to close in, the shadows advancing, their whispers now a chorus of incomprehensible words. Matt grabbed Ryan and pulled him toward the far side of the room, where a small, hidden passageway led out of the chamber. "We have to get out of here," Matt shouted, dragging Ryan along as the shadows swarmed behind them. The passageway was narrow, forcing them to crawl on their hands and knees, the air growing thinner with every second. The shadows were relentless, their whispers growing louder, their cold hands reaching for them. Finally, after what felt like hours, they emerged from the passage and into the forest outside the city. They collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, their hearts pounding in their chests, but the shadows didn't follow. For now, as Matt and Ryan staggered to their feet, Matt looked down at his arm. His sleeve had been torn, and underneath, the skin was marked with one of the strange symbols from the tunnel, etched deep into his flesh. "Ryan," Matt whispered, his voice trembling, "it's not over. If you thought this story was terrifying, you won't want to miss my next video, The Ghost Town, where an urban explorer uncovers a town's twisted secrets that refuse to stay buried. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss more horrifying stories just like this one. Stay safe out there, or at least try to.